Okay. Hello, good evening all. I'm CA Gunshan Agarwal, Secretary of Rohtak Branch of ICI. Today we have a webinar on audit standards that is organized by the IASB. The webinar is on global trend in internal audit, a look ahead. Today we have with us three different speakers and our Central Council member, CA Charanjit Singh Nanda, and our Rohtak branch chairman, CA Nikhil Narang sir. I would like to invite our branch chairman, CA Nikhil Narang sir, for his welcoming remarks. Over to you, Nikhil sir. Nikhil sir, are you there?
It seems he's not there.
Okay. Okay, so I welcome on the behalf of CA Nikhil Narang sir and on the Rohtak branch for today's webinar. And we are very excited to have this webinar that is hosted by our branch and which was organized with IASB board. Now we have with us CH Charanjit Singh Nanda sir. We all know about him very well, and we have personally many of us has personally met with him, and we all know how active he is for every members and CA students. Coming to his brief profile, he is currently chairman of IASB board and also the DAB board, that is Digital Accounting and Assurance Board. Also, he is vice chairman of BFSI, that is Banking, Finance Services and Insurance Committee. He, coming to his past experience, he was having a member of Quality Review Board. Also, he was in the Central Council from 2004 to 2016. He was a chairman of different committees that includes Women Empowerment Committee and Internal Audit of ICAI, and the member in the industries of Institute of Chartered Accountants. Apart from that, he was a past chairman for the corporate and NGO sectors and the chairman for the committee of BFSI and financial marketing and investor protection. Also, he was a regular member of the SEBI, that is for the primary market and the mutual funds for 2007 to 2010 year. Apart from that, he has represented ICA on the SEBI committee on the disclosure and accounting standards. He was the convener of expert committee constituted by the MCA on the investor protection. Also, he was a member of Southern Asian Federation of Accounting Committee. He was also a part of the NIRCs in the period of 1998 to 2004, where he was held as a chairman and treasurer. He has been serving institute from past more than 2 decades, I would say, or maybe 3 decades. So today we have with Charanjit Singh Nanda sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Gunjanji. The speaker of the day, Mr. Harshit Bakshi, the chairman of Rohtak branch, Mr. Nikhil Narang, Madam Gunjan, and all officials from the Internal Audit Standard Board, including Madam Shivani Nigam, Aarti Bansal, Arun Agarwal, Surbhi Tyagi, and ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a proud privilege to speak to you. I'm sorry I'm traveling. I'm in Kutch now, but it becomes imperative on the part of the chairman to address before the conference starts. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you that your board, the Internal Audit Standard Board, is constantly striving to give the best services, to ensure that best programs happen. And in this process, every Saturday, 6 to 9, we have a program of Internal Audit Standard Board. Every fortnightly, we have a program on internal audit standards. The basic purpose is to ensure that people like Mr. Harshit Mehta, Harshit Bakshi, who has a deep insight into the subject, are ultimately able to leverage that knowledge and imperatively share that knowledge with you. We are now contemplating to have membership going largely into internal audit, which is essentially a sunrise area. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will not take much of your time. I would give the dice back to Madam Gunjan Agarwal because as you are, I am also very keen to listen to Mr. Harshit Bakshi. I am seeing Madam Nilanjana Sen, the second speaker of the day, also joining in. Thanks, Madam. Thanks for joining and contributing to the cause of this profession. Thank you. Over to Madam Gunjan Agarwal. Madam, the dice is all yours now.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a nice verse. And we are very excited, to hear from Harshit Bakshi, sir, and Nilanjana, ma'am, and our third speaker also. Harshit, sir, very warm welcome from our side. So coming to his brief profile, today topics, Harshit sir is going to guide us more about the paradigm shift in the internal audit. I know this topic is very new. Even when I just read about this topic, I was keen to know how the audit is, turning different phases in today's world and how we are compiling in the global world. And he is currently a director at Eastern Empire in the Mumbai. He has been, seasonal in the audit, risk, compliance, and governance professions, and currently a qualified cooperative director. He has been a 2 decades of experience, in the BFSI, ITFS industries. Listening from him will be a great opportunity for all of us. In his current loan, he is scaling the India to the global level and in the capability centers around the audit, insurance, and risk advisories. Apart from that, he has been working with the Citi Groups earlier and the Barclay Bank, Tata AIG, and the First Course as a CRO and CCO. He has been working closely with the boards there in the risk audit committees and executive committees. He has been successfully set up and optimized audit and insurance and enterprises risk in the global environment and contribute towards the sustainability governance practice. Apart from that, he is providing, he is educating and mentoring all of us from a quite long time, and he's passionate in engaging the same, providing inside discoveries. He visited many great institutions that includes IIM Ahmedabad, SP Jain Mumbai, NVI Nepal, Amity Universities, our Institute of Chartered Accountant of India, IAE, and GRS events. So I would really excited, and I know we all are excited to hear from you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. First of all, sincere thanks to IASB board of ICI, and definitely especially to Sri Nandaji. Nandaji, you continue to be our mentor and the guiding force for the entire fraternity, and we are so grateful to you. I think needless to say, very pleasant and happy to be associated with this platform. And when we interact, when go back and interact with the fraternity, everyone is finding this one of the most useful forum. Primarily, as you rightly touch upon, Nandaji, is basically with the people coming from a different and diverse experience, coming and bringing the practical insight from industry, which is what is one of the most valuable contribution this specific platform. And IASB board is what driving. So special mention and thanks to that. Thanks to C. Nikhilji, Gunjan ma'am, also my fellow speakers, and good evening to all the participants. When I actually came across this topic and saying that internal audit look ahead, I thought it's probably the most relevant at this point of time in terms of internal audit as a function. And precisely if you are speaking about saying that look ahead, what lies ahead for all of us, specifically in the internal audit as a discipline. And that's what I thought. So when I looked at the overall program, I thought, let me set the context and set the tone and begin with saying that is internal audit really at what juncture? And if you have to kind of and look forward, what exactly the scenario which looks to be. and what we need to be kind of mindful of. I am also aware in terms of a couple of very, very specific topic oriented the next two technical sessions which are coming up after me. One primarily around the digital pace, and the second one is primarily also on one of the very, very specific like risk-based audit approach. What I chose that so to begin with, maybe very relevant is to kind of create a broader context and understand where exactly the internal audit function stands today and how do we all collectively as a fraternity do in order to make it even more value additive, even more relevant in the time to come. Now, a couple of interesting point before I begin is that, when I'm going to speak, the deliberation will be equally applicable to both the constituent. One, are respected members who are maybe part of a corporate sector and part of an internal audit function and doing internal audit and driving it for a corporate. But at the same time, another equally important and bigger fraternity of a practicing chartered accountants, where the internal audit is relevance from the point of view of delivering that as a service to our client across the industry spectrum. So entire discussion and deliberation will be touching equally well to both the constituent. What I intend to do in the next 45 minutes is basically let's quickly go through some of the emerging trends, which are necessarily more of a macro, which includes both global and local in nature. Then quickly go through internal audit and quickly run through the life cycle and pick up some of the key attributes which are very relevant to be mindful of. And then we'll kind of try to that if keeping those global trend and some of the internal audit key attributes in mind, what are the opportunity of adding value through internal audit and kind of preparing and embrace for the future to come. And then we'll briefly spend time in terms of and so what necessarily need to be done for a fraternity as we're looking ahead. So friends, moving on, how overall economic or broader scenario which is emerging, and not necessarily this is primarily overall business scenario, both considering global as well as local trend. What we all have seen, and which is with the very rapid change and pace, the business models and the business practices are undergoing significant, and needless to say, many of them are undergoing permanent changes. What essentially is happening these days, and which is likely to further strengthen in a time to come, irrespective of whichever industry, whether it's local or global, but business models are becoming more distributed business models across all the sector. If you closely see, the consolidation is happening. So various type of partnership, both locally and globally, are happening. And also something which is more within the corporate or your client segment, the hybrid working models are emerging. There are many such similar kind of global and local trends are emerging, but many of them are expected to take a permanent shape in a time to come. What it also very clearly indicates that each of these trends are going to open a new challenges. At the same time, if we look at it very closely and stay aligned and keep ourselves changing, each of this change also is bringing equally interesting and big opportunity for ourselves. So I think as a fraternity, specifically, we have to keep looking from internal audit perspective that how these trends are emerging, what kind of shape it is taking place for us as a corporate as well as for our clients, and what kind of a new opportunity which are likely to come. At the same time, how do we gear up ourselves in order to address some of the challenges associated with these changes in the business model and the practices. Second thing, I think we can have an entire one full day session going around the technology, but I think a couple of big points is technology is, and it will be continue to be one of the biggest influencer for entire business environment, various business practices. If we took a step back and look at it purely from the angle of what it means for internal audit, and broadly then how technology is impacting corporate governance practices at a large, there are two big interesting things are happening. One, we need to understand and brace up and cope up with what are those emerging technology, whether we call it as a kind of an artificial intelligence or machine learning or analytics or data analytics, so on and so forth. And how each of this technology we can smartly, very efficiently and effectively use it to discharge our internal audit functional responsibility. But not to stop there, as an auditor, if you have to be relevant and very successful in a time to come, we also need to understand those technology first ourselves and understand it, how it's basically impacting various businesses from a controls perspective, from a risk perspective, and so that it will enable us to kind of review those processes or changes and where this technology is going to be very heavily used from an audit perspective. Each of these kind of technology change, needless to say, is also bringing big opportunity for also extending kind of an advisory kind of services to our clients. What is another very interesting trend which is developing, if we speak about the skills and the capability. Now, all along past decade or so, what we have seen that, in a conventional manner, basically the skill and capability were chasing the work. So we had kind of a concentrated pocket of the work, industries and service industry or manufacturing industry and so on and so forth. And people with the skill and capability have to chase that. Now the whole dynamics has changed, and that's going to even further strengthen in a time to come where businesses are becoming locational and geographically neutral. And business has to chase, the work has to chase wherever the skill is available. That is very powerful change, which is going to significantly change the whole work dynamics in the time to come. A lot of work which is going to come equally well at the tier 2, tier 3 cities. In fact, it's expected to attract more work. What it means for an internal audit function, specifically for the practicing chartered accountants, where you have to kind of your ability to serve the client, that's also going to open up significantly big kind of an consulting or advisory opportunity where basically you may not need to have a physical presence in those spaces, but still with the use of technology and remote connect, you are able to kind of serve the clients those area. At the same time, as you are scaling up your own delivery and the practice, you have a very widely spread skill set and the people also available, which are going to be across the spectrum, which can easily be tapped. But what essentially it brings as a challenge that, what's going to be key differentiator for successfully discharging internal audit is the agility and speed of execution. Is going to be one of the key differentiator because the work is going to be spreaded. Clients are going to be much more demanding and they will want the execution to be happening at a lot of speed. At the same time, one need to be expected to be very agile and respond to those changes. So I think those are some of the attributes which will emerge, which will make internal audit kind of very relevant in the time to come. Continuing with the same, specifically across all the industry sector, and whether it's a local or global, there are significant changes which are happening in the regulatory landscape. What it essentially going to transfer, and which is already started, that cost of compliance for all our corporate as well as our clients are going to increase manifold. And in that process, most of your client, and whether it's a big scale, big size client versus the mid segment or even smaller client, they will find it very difficult to keep building that in-house expertise. And so there is always going to be increasing need to have an external on-time expertise available in order to help them specifically with the audit function. And that's I'm personally seeing as a big opportunity which is going to evolve specifically from the regulatory landscape changes which are happening. If you look at whether the banking sector regulator or maybe financial services regulator, insurance sector regulator, pharmaceutical regulator, each of them may be at a different stage in the speed, but each of them are very consciously moving away from what it was earlier, which was more of a principle-based or kind of a rule-based regime to more of a principle-based regime. And the focus is shifting a lot on the self-governance and the assurance activity. Now, if you closely just look at it from an internal audit perspective, that's a big opportunity along with the big responsibility. But since your client and the entire corporate sector are expected to move toward having a lot of good practices around the self-governance, what my close interaction with the boards across the organization, the directors, is that everyone is now looking from independent assurance with the significantly kind of a more requirement, the profile which is going to come. So that's obviously is a very positive sign from internal audit as a fraternity and a function to kind of leverage a lot on that. Another important thing which happening, and this is another important point from an internal audit perspective, if you look at the broader governance, right, corporate governance, whether it's a listed firm or non-listed firm, but everyone is slowly with the different speed, but consciously moving toward what's the concept called integrated governance. Now, historically, if you look at the 3 lines of defense and those typical conventional models, and internal audit is always looked at kind of a very, very independent third line of defense. But in reality, those lines of defense are getting a little bit blurred. What essentially it means that while internal audit will continue to have to be independent voice and independent execution, they are now expected to have a very, very close linkages and working with all other lines of defense and other governance function, be it a risk management function, be it other control function, be it a compliance function. But that's where, so if your ability to kind of discharge your internal audit services very well to a client will largely is going to also depend whether you have a larger horizon and visibility on the broader aspects of the corporate governance, and are you kind of connected and leveraging on the input and output coming from each of this kind of a discipline. Second thing, which is very powerful, little bit slow, but that's going to be key differentiator in a time to come, that each organization now there is no imperative, right? They all are bound to, whether you like it or no, by choice or by kind of force. Every future enterprises will be decided based on the purpose, culture, and the values. This is exactly the key fundamental points which are going to decide the future and the sustainability of the future enterprises. So from an internal audit perspective, also kind of, and one need to kind of keep focus on how you can have an internal audit touching across the software aspects also. Another important point purely from a practicing chartered accountant perspective is that how ethical your relationship with the client is going to be one of the key differentiator to decide about the success and failure of internal audit engagement. And essentially the way we interact and kind of look at it, each and every stakeholder is looking to have associated with the firm, with the individuals who are necessarily have an ability to deliver absolutely ethical business practices, which is going to be at the core of any client relationship in a time to come. So I thought that's broadly a summary in terms of what are some of the important trends which are emerging. To keep it in mind, because each of them will help us when we take a look back in terms of an internal audit perspective, how we need to be mindful of and how we can leverage on each of these trends. Now, moving on slightly, so quickly, we'll not spend too much of a time, but internal audit framework, and there are 5 classical stages. Each of them, now, if you have to look at slightly differently, what are some of the attributes which are going to be very, very powerful in a time to come? When it comes to whole strategy, so when you kind of think about the strategy of delivering internal audit, as an internal auditor now, you will be expected to be very, very clear with respect to a very clear understanding upfront. What are exactly business priority? Businesses are getting more wider, complex, and as an internal auditor, it will be next to impossible to touch across everything, right? So one need to be very conscious and clear about how do we continue to strategize and align internal audit, which is fully aligned with the changing business priority, right? Gone are the days where internal auditor was kind of expected to know only about the firm or the client to which our service. Each internal auditor is now expected to kind of also know about the what is ecosystem, which is what are the industry trends, how the things are happening across the industry level, bring that expertise back into that assignment, right? And something which I already spoken about, that everyone is moving towards that 80-20 principle, in the sense, as an internal auditor now, you will be expected to very smartly, very strategically pick up those 20% of the areas which are exactly very high risk area. We will have a separate session coming, I think third one in the line, which is purely on the risk-based internal audit approach. So I'll not touch on that, but basically very smartly applying what matters the most, understand and realign the audit execution strategy, delivery exactly around those areas which are extremely important and critical for the stakeholder, and not necessarily kind of unnecessarily focus too much of time and energy in the areas which are not that relatively important. When it comes to structure, which is the second pillar, I think a lot of focus is going to be on independence, objectivity, and expertise, right? Independence is something which will continue to be there. Expertise is what we have spoken. A lot of emphasis will be on the objectivity, because when it comes to your ability to prove the point on the table, how successfully as an internal auditor you are able to kind of support it in absolute objective manner, along with the necessary support of data, facts, that's going to be key differentiating factor, and internal auditor need to be mindful of that. Now, in order to kind of have a successful delivery, end of the day, it's all people, right? How successfully you are able to build the team through which you are able to deliver the mandates across the internal audit to your client. The team need to be multidisciplinary. You need to have a people who are industry expert. You need to have some of your team members who are kind of very, very hardcore expert with the internal audit processes, methodology, or tool. If you have a sizable team size and practice, you are bound to have someone at least least who is very high on using the technology and its effective use, specifically in internal audit function. So those are some of the attributes which are going to be kind of one need to be mindful. And obviously one need to be have a very, very focused execution exactly on the line which you have spoken, that you are expected to have a very agile. At the same time, you're expected to have a very speed of execution. So no matter whatsoever your engagement, whatever are the commercial aspects, and whatever is your strategy which you put in place, if you are unable to execute it very well with respect to quality on time, it's not going to be sustainable. Clients are going to be extremely demanding. When it comes to fourth pillar, which is process, primarily you are needing to have, so internal audit conventionally is basically look for little bit in hindsight, right? Little bit in the past. If I think okay, thanks. I think we have stopped the echo. Thank you. So there is a need for internal audit to move from a hindsight to foresight. And when I say that, it essentially that, while we continue to leverage a lot on how things have happened in past, and trying to understand the trend, but internal audit is expected to have absolute clarity and focus on anticipating your ability to anticipate what likely to go wrong, and then kind of and check then test the controls around those areas are going to be absolutely important. Also, slowly and steadily, internal auditor has a huge opportunity to transition itself from typically a control role to more of a trusted advisor role. And when I see that, there is a huge opportunity to also kind of leverage on what work we have done from internal audit, but moving into slowly into advisory role without having any execution conflicts in the place. Agility is what we have spoken, and one need to be very clear in terms of what exactly are the value which you are delivering over and above your commercial aspects, which are going to be key differentiator if one has to kind of design and deliver internal audit successfully in a bigger way to our client. Technology is a fifth pillar, but primarily everything which we are going to do in a time to come in internal audit, there is a huge scope of getting it done through the smart analytics. So analytics, I think one of the my practical experience and all of us, irrespective of what exactly segment to which we are, initially when it starts an initial part of journey, there is always some amount of stigma and inhibition. But I would sincerely urge every kind of person associated with the internal audit, not necessarily only internal audit, but even expanding that horizon to kind of another investigation, statutory audit or anything, but go and embrace that analytics and the familiarity with the technology, because that's not going to kind of stay away. It's going to be redefine the whole landscape, and it is a very powerful kind of a proposition. What another challenge or struggle I have seen with the internal auditor, that after doing a lot of hard work and lots of kind of work, when it comes to eventually put it across to the table to the very single stakeholder, are we able to effectively put it across the message and the key issues which are there on table? And that's where I'm seeing a huge success which we all have seen implementing and been kind of done very well, is a visualization, right? There are a lot of technology support available where the same message and the story which you wanted to put it across, instead of putting it across 2-3 page report, one can just with the ease of one single slide with the 5 or 6 different graphical visualization form, one can put the same message much more effectively. And that's what is kind of been liked and easily understood by the stakeholders sitting across the table. And obviously one need to have the familiarity with all the emerging technology, because we as an auditor, unless we understand that technology ourselves, we won't be able to leverage that, right? So I think those again are some of the attributes I thought are important to keep it in mind if one has to really transform our internal audit capabilities in the time to come. With those two understanding what are the trends, how things are evolving, and then saying that what are some of the important points which one need to lever if one has to structure whole internal audit philosophy. Let me move on to the third phase, which is like, so what are the areas through which we have a huge opportunity to add value and kind of continue to kind of become a very, very valued partner to all our clients. Now, obviously, one need to first quickly reassess that at what stage we as in capability as well as our clients are, right? Each of them at the different stage of maturity, and one need to quickly understand. So I'm trying to put across your ability to add value, one need to be clearly assigned with. So some of the clients will be at the very, very basic and the very primitive stage of their kind of an overall governance practices. So if on a purely very quick fixes or operational manner as an internal auditor, some of the areas which I've listed where there is a huge opportunity to kind of an add value, something which is more of an IFC, RCM style. A lot of people, corporates are currently looking at the overall internal control as a very complex situation and looking as an additional value addition coming from internal auditor, that how one can optimize, how one can identify and kind of and avoid an overlap versus various control mechanism. Obviously, something which is very basic and operational is a policies, procedural aspects, data analytics and visualization, where people are looking from an internal audit team that, can you help management and your client to have what kind of good data analytics and visualization support which they can leverage, what can be kind of done best when you sit across the table in the audit committee, and how you do leverage in the board meeting. That's in one area, right? One of the undercurrent and which I would like all to be very, very mindful of as far as internal audit is concerned, that, from a conventional philosophy of a point in time audit, now the internal audit function itself is also moving towards the real time or near time ongoing monitoring and reporting. So I think practically which we are seeing in the industry also, and we are seeing that this is what is happening even from the chartered accountant firms who are providing internal audit as a service. That you need to have that capability of just designing an annual calendar and that kind of delivering while it is continue to stay, but you're expected to kind of also have a very real time or ongoing monitoring and reporting, and which obviously one can easily do through the very smart use of technology. A lot of help and support is going to be expected also as a new opportunity from internal audit function about the help on certification and attestations. And this goes back to one of the fundamental point which I spoke, that all the boards and audit committees and the stakeholders, including even the regulator, they are now looking for a lot of assurance kind of an activity, right? So while within the in-house, all the activity which are happening with your client, in addition to that, they will continue to look for a lot of independent assurance and validation coming out of an expert. And that's where, obviously, without compromising on any clear interest in the conflict, but that's a new good opportunity of value addition which is coming up. One of the interesting trend which is emerging, which was not pretty much there about 5 to 10 years back, is that all the corporates are now looking at the freelancing or some kind of a project-driven internal audit engagement with very positively. There is no stigma to that. And that when I say, because it's a kind of an specifically skill set based or need based kind of an expertise available, tap them and have an engagement opportunity. So that's again in maybe operational level, but a good opportunity to kind of look forward to. If your client or your service delivery is more somewhere middle between, not exactly at the basic, but not at the same time very, very advanced, and more on a conversion stage, there are a lot of area where internal audit can play a kind of a very value additive role in terms of also accessing what's the fraud vulnerability and investigation related opportunity. Obviously, I think what is the third party performance and the risk assessment? These are the new area which is slightly going beyond. So it's an ecosystem view, right? All the corporates are now expected that internal audit should not limit their entire scope, design, delivery to all the constituent and function within the corporate. But one then also need to look at what are the important vendor and third party, how the risk is coming from those external sources, and whether internal audit is also evaluating the effectiveness of the control around that. Business resiliency, and this topic, I think, again, has become extremely relevant and important, specifically from the post-COVID perspective, and a lot of scope and demand coming and generating in this area. Some of the things, when I say that, everyone is now moving towards the culture and the purpose and value-driven system, lots of internal audit engagement and the delivery opportunities are getting aligned to whistleblowing mechanism, sexual harassment investigations, crisis management, dispute management, management, right? Reputational management. So those are some of the new areas which are emerging, which are going to be fairly important. And you will find that being placed in your normal internal audit activity. So I think one need to be aware, understand, and I think institute and everyone is kind of an obviously anticipating and also having those standards coming out at very timely basis, which becomes a good benchmark for everyone to kind of align. But as a successful internal auditor, if you want to leverage more, those are the good basic opportunity. Now, if you are within the corporate or if your client who are relatively fairly advanced, mature stage of a strategic opportunity, internal audit has a big role to play in terms of how enterprise risk management functions are getting set up in the fund. So I'm clearly seeing, at least in a mature organization, and if your clients are matured enough, the audit are also doing an internal audit. People are doing an audit of effectiveness of the risk management function in itself, right? Which is so essentially more in terms of messaging how effectively other governance functions are functioning, and that's a huge opportunity for internal audit people to kind of dwell into. One of the thing is that the tone which is getting generated in all the audit committee and the board is that while we continue to invest in the internal audit function within, or we'll continue to have kind of an external firm helping us either fully internal audit activity or even there's a co-sourcing model. But at least every third year, people are going to go for a lot of benchmarking with the external good practices or more peer reviews, right? That's definitely sometimes getting recommended through the regulator. Sometimes it is more regulated from independent director. But as an internal auditor, if you have a kind of a scenario where for a corporate somewhere where you are not doing internal audit, so without losing any compromise or conflict of interest, those are the corporate where if you are not doing internal audit, you straight have a big opportunity coming up for doing something which is more towards the benchmarking and the peer review. One thing definitely is become a buzzword and is going to become much bigger is the internal audit will be expected. They are expected. A lot of mature corporates are today doing it. But what exactly is a culture audit? So how company's culture is, and auditors are expected to familiarize and look at it, all the various control attributes which are basically capable and helpful to build a good sound culture. Is culture basically how the culture defined, how it's getting translated in a day-to-day life through the code of conduct, what are the various business practices, how the grievance mechanism are getting handled. Those are the important area which are coming, but these are more towards the strategic aspects of internal audit. Obviously, we are speaking and knowing every day about the ESG and the sustainability reporting various standard which are evolving. India is also responding pretty much at the same pace to the global changes, but this is now reality, right? So internal audit again will have a huge role to play in terms of focusing and developing the capability which are moving around the ESG audit, sustainability reporting in audits. A lot of new corporate intelligence which is kind of coming at a large scale, which are also aligned to a lot of inorganic growth activity, merger acquisitions, and so on and so forth. While internal audit will not play a direct role, but as an internal auditor, you have a good role to play somewhere in terms of helping your clients in terms of driving with sharing the insight and maybe keeping an eye on industry. A lot of work which is coming from internal audit, which is related that IT governance. So far in the journey of technology, IT governance was broadly kept separate. But from both the perspective, when I spoke about an internal or rather integrated governance, from a risk perspective, whole of an IT risk, cyber security risk, everything is getting converged into broader enterprise risk management. And exactly on the same line, internal audits are now expected to be ready and also kind of add value in auditing the whole IT governance of your client. So that's a very fairly strategic, it's a slightly niche area, but it's going to be an integral and huge value additive opportunity. Forensic audits, Russ. I think one of the interesting point, and I think Institute is so kind of an advance in terms of responding and coming back with those forensic accounting standards, and industry from other side is gearing up well. One of the very interesting thing which I'm seeing sitting in the industry, which is definitely happening and is going to happen in a big way. If you look at it, maybe in the past, forensic audits were always used in a reacting mode. So after something goes wrong, And when you put maybe initial efforts of going and figuring out what's happened, and if you figure out it's likely to be much bigger, that's where more in a reacting mode to figure out what has already gone wrong. Forensic audit used to kind of come into picture. Believe me, many of these corporates, many of your clients, you also must have seen, have started embedding forensic audit in a maybe small way, but it's going to become bigger in a much more proactive manner. Finance functions are now being asked and expected to start getting engaged with the forensic audit and saying that how do we leverage that on a routine, on a proactive, ongoing basis in order to identify something which is emerging, so that we are able to identify and fix it there, and it becomes an issue later on. So it's again a very fantastic opportunity, but it's kind of from an Intel audit perspective, it's like how one can proactively get engaged and start kind of a discussion with our clients and have that forensic audit getting embedded in overall kind of an audit universe. And obviously, Intel auditor, without compromising on your conflict of interest, have a huge role to play also in a governance advisory to the boards, right? So those are kind of, and I thought as a value additive opportunity, and it was definitely going to help Intel audit in terms of transforming and responding to the challenges which are coming up. If we are not mindful of these areas, then probably I'm seeing the clearly a risk that internal audit as a function, then if continue to choose to a status quo and doesn't realign, doesn't reinvent, then possibly will face a kind of a stagnancy or not being at least valued as a kind of a very valued value additive advisor. So it is kind of also in the interest of us as a fraternity to kind of be proactive, gear up, understand ourselves, and go back and engage with our clients very proactively, that how we are able to kind of help our clients to also address some of these challenges which they are facing, right? So then a little bit moving towards the last part of my deliberation, considering all this, that macro and microeconomic kind of development, what are some of the things which we need to be mindful as far as internal audit attribute in the cycle is concerned, and then depends upon the which value additive stage, what are some of the areas where one need to be mindful and consider using this as a big opportunity which are coming our way. I thought in order to summarize it smartly, what are some of the major trends which are emerging in what we need to be mindful? So one is an industry focus, right? Each one of us at the individual level, at the firm level, whether I'm working in a corporate as admin level, one need to be very clearly. And I found that, initially I found some of the people individual level or at the firm level, practice level, they try to kind of touch upon everything available on the plat. Whereas versus that I have seen a lot of success that maybe when you're beginning the journey at whatever stage you are, it makes sense to identify which are the industry, which are our core competencies, which are our unique proposition. One need to kind of go deeper in those industry, because industry specific nuances, industry specific regulations, some of the control environment are very kind of differing from industry to industry. So instead of kind of trying to lay eggs everywhere, possibly to begin with, at least one need to kind of have that industry valued proposition. Once kind of we establish fairly good understanding, engagement, reasonably good size in those industry, one can then start expanding horizontally across the other industry vertical, where there is a kind of some kind of a logical similarity. I found that usually everyone prefer to stick to a kind of what is the comfort zone, but in a time to come, when I'm seeing that internal audit more as a paradigm shift, what I necessarily means is that also think beyond the traditional area which we all are comfortable as a professional. If we do not choose to kind of do that, at some point of time, we all are running the risk of getting obsoleted. Look at the whole kind of a new sector, service sector, to which kind of was not that relevant maybe a decade back, has become probably one of the most important pillar within the overall economy, right? Look at the players which are emerging, which possibly we haven't seen decade back. There are bond technology companies, e-commerce companies, whole startup ecosystem is kind of emerging. If you look at any sector, in every sector, whether it's a financial services sector, whether it's a retail sector, but aggregator or consolidator kind of business models are emerging. Essentially, each of them are opportunity. That's the way we need to look at it. And in each of these kind of so if we have kind of built a good understanding, good practice in some other mature industry, there is a lot to leverage good practices from those sectors and kind of and get engaged with some of the, so one need not to be worried about unnecessarily that how this sector works. One need to quickly get that develop understanding, get engaged, and use this as a good business opportunity in the time to come. Second thing, which is again an extremely important success factor, is that let's not compete. It's that the collaboration is going to be key, and the collaboration is a new competition. That's the way one has to kind of evolve. And when I say that, as an individual practicing for the internal audit or as a firm, one need to build eventually a good kind of an hybrid model, right? Where it will be some time beyond the scope and capability to build all the skill set, all kind of an available capacity within the one individual or within that one firm who is delivering and dealing with the internal audit. And that's why what kind of similar cross-functional skills which other firms have to collaborate and then coming out and giving kind of more of a across the platform leverage kind of services. That's going to be key. And I think very, very, very happy and thankful that at least last around a year or so, Institute is kind of very looking at it positively, having those kind of giving more of a formal shape and encouraging all the participants to kind of leverage with each other and kind of serve better to the clients. At the same time, what I already spoken about when you speak about in collaboration, internal audit engagement with the client are not necessarily only about delivering the audit calendar. While doing it, one need to be very proactively and continuously stay engaged with the clients and help them to anticipate their own problem. Bring the kind of an external learning and discuss with them in terms of how the similar problems are getting addressed in your maybe other industry verticals, and help them to navigate through the challenge. So this is where is going to be helpful to internal auditor to transform from a conventional auditor to more of a value additive and trusted advisor. And the last point, which is we can have an entire full day session, but to summarize in a couple of minutes, there is no choice but to embrace the digital, right? And when I said digital, is going beyond kind of in technology. Technology, once there is no fear with the embracing and adopting to the technology, because world is going pretty fast on that. There are two specific aspects which I like to mention as far as the whether you are working in a corporate sector as a part of internal audit firm, or you are kind of practicing internal audit as a service delivery to your client. If you look at internal audit life cycle, right, starting from client engagement to the proposal to the prospect management, having your agreement and the contracts, your entire internal audit execution reporting, including even the ongoing relationship management, each of this stage are pretty much kind of done much more efficiently these days with the use of smart technology, right? And these are obviously also a cost-effective technology solutions are now available in the market. So one need to be very, very forthcomingly kind of look forward to scanning to it, because that is also looked at as a kind of a very positive point when you are kind of putting across proposal to the client, right? Client, board, audit committee are looking at that how the firm which we are proposing to get engaged have their own digital delivery and then engagement capability. And sometime I think if the firm is not kind of equipped to handle into that area, it may turn out to be negative. So it's more that proactively one gets engaged and have those technology support available in order to kind of rightly perceived by our clients also as a digitally ready people to get engaged with. Second thing, technology, if you look at are more digital from a risk perspective, right? A lot of privacy, data confidentiality, and all these issues, I'm sure all of us and all of you must be facing in a day-to-day life in your executing the internal audit engagement with the client. And that's where all clients are now giving absolutely critical important. And one, so every one of us, and you are expected to kind of demonstrate that how digitally secured business practices you have developed, right? So I'll continue to deliver internal audit assignments. Obviously, you are bound to have a lot of company confidential data, strategic information, financial information, and you are bound to kind of have maintained that all aspects related to confidentiality, privacy, availability, retrievability in a manner which helps your client to be absolutely foolproof and secure. So as a firm or as an individual, when you get engaged into internal audit assignments, one need to proactively demonstrate your capability that how secure you will handle all these things by using a smart technology, because that is going to be again a key success or differentiating factor between the success success and failures in a time to come. So that's what precisely I think bang on in the 45 minutes. I think what I could deliberate and bring about some of the thought, starting from how the overall ecosystem is emerging, what are some of the challenges and opportunity coming out of that. Then we kind of briefly touch upon, in order to do a good justice, if what are some of the key attributes which one need to be mindful of across the various stages of internal audit cycle. Then we kind of briefly touched upon what are the value additive opportunities which are emerging and internal audit function, or as a practitioner, one has a huge scope which is coming out of that. And then I thought in the end, we kind of ended up with saying that what are some of the thing more at the industrial level, at the collaboration level, and at the digital level, which one need to be mindful of in order to kind of. So with that thought process, let me conclude that I firmly believe of looking an internal audit from all the perspective that, it's a time. And so it's not very far away. It's now, it's today is where internal audit individually as well as a fraternity, if we are not mindful and if we are not gearing up and embracing and preparing for that future, it's not tomorrow, it's today. So that's what, if not now, when? It's today. So with that, let me conclude. Thanks a lot again for this opportunity, and best wishes, and look forward to kind of and stay engaged with the platform and the fraternity as a whole. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Harshit sir, for providing us the knowledge more about paradigm shift and other aspect of the internal audit. Members, if you have any questions, you can put in the chat box, and I can ask the same with the Harshit sir.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. I request all to please put all the comments you have or any query you have in the chat box. Also, we have a Q&A session after 8:30. You can ask the same. So there was one question that was from Satish Joshi. Please ponder upon execution of an internal audit assignment in the line with the scope of work and TOR.
Yeah, so I think it's a good question. Now that's where some of the practical challenges which keep emerging, that once you kind of decide the scope and then execution, and which is what I think what my experience is, which I briefly touched upon, that today even if you kind of initially finalize the TOR, right, when you start executing, you are expected to have that inbuilt agility and flexibility keep coming in to execute and redesign or change some of the things which are not necessarily in the line of an TOR. So I think my practical approach and advice is that when you get engaged with the client, be ready to factor those kind of an expectation which are emerging. So I think if one is not able to understand, accommodate, and kind of deliver on those changes which are not necessarily exactly defined upfront or in line with the TOR, and then probably you are running the risk of not being kind of very engaged or very dynamic or agile partner. So I think that's the way my advice is, that it is practically, yes, very big difficulty in terms of, because you try to plan, execute everything, and it is with the reference point of an TOR. But at the same time, have that agility to understand and accommodate those changes, stay engaged proactively with the client to understand the source from where those changes with respect to TOR are coming. If you are able to do a justice to that, and then accommodate that and bring that into execution, if you can do it successfully, it's been perceived as a huge value addition to clients. So I think one need to be ready and not necessarily always go back that it's say, hey, it's not aligned with the TOR, and so kind of, and it's difficult, or we won't be able to accommodate that. So that's what is my kind of, and hope I have been able to address that.
Yeah, thank you, sir. The other question is from: is it mandatory to follow internal audit by statutory auditor?
I would say this is somewhat linked to a regulatory prescription. So say for example, if the firm is listed if say for example it's a banking or insurance regulation, or maybe it's a mutual fund. So largely in the banking financial services, as well as from a SEBI perspective for a listed firm, there are linkages are created which mandates. So this is more of a mandate which is going to statutory auditor, that for statutory auditor, in order to kind of deliver their job properly, they are mandated to get engaged with the internal auditor and understand that whether internal auditor have done their defined role in appropriate manner. But practically it goes even beyond that, at least if not much more engaged. I'm clearly seeing a practice that at least on a quarterly basis, statutory auditor is getting engaged proactively with the internal audit to understand what area they have covered, what are the kind of control weaknesses which are coming, and then precisely, if not all, at least statutory auditor picks up on the control weaknesses which are more related to the financial controls or more related to accounting related control, and try to look at and map it with the what is the outcome which they have done from statutory audit. So in that context, I would say mandated, yes, not to entire kind of a spectrum, to the sector which are regulated, to the is there is the linkage between statutory auditor and internal audit is pretty much mandated. The onus to make it happen and really kind of drive it is more on a statutory auditor and not on internal auditor.
Okay, sir. Thanks, sir. Next question is from Kaushal. How is cyber security and data privacy being considered as agenda in the internal audit, in the shift in internal audit apart from BFSI?
Sure. So two things. I mean, I'm expected that, we will be hearing much more in one of the forthcoming session, which is more towards kind of a digital. But more importantly, I think you will get that precise answer in the third session, which is risk-based audit. But to tell you, I mean, auditor, eventually internal auditor is now moving purely towards the risk-based audit. And what it means, currently I'm seeing irrespective of banking and financial services sector, whichever kind of scale and size you are, cybersecurity in general and data privacy are always, I found, is one of the top risks in every company's kind of broader enterprise risk management philosophy. What it tells that if cybersecurity or data privacy is one of the top risks which company is facing, obviously internal audit is expected to pick that up in overall scoping and sizing and your execution and delivery of internal audit. So from that perspective, I would say even if there is no regulatory mandate, right, from a risk perspective, the fact that it is currently and in the time to come, it's continue to be looked at by board, by audit committee, by other even shareholder, that's going to be more important and one of the important critical strategic risks. Internal audit is bound to kind of have that readiness and capability to look at it as a part of internal audit delivery.
Thanks, sir. The next question is, sir, management has appointed as an internal auditor, but has provided scope for process audit. Legally, whether there will be any trouble, or we have to act as an internal auditor in the terms of company acts, or popularly, our liability is linked to the scope given to us?
Say primarily from a legal angle or a scope, purely if you put a full stop at the legal angle, there is no prohibition of internal audit not doing a kind of a process audit. Right, but only thing it goes back to your engagement prospects in terms of so I would say that if you are already doing kind of a full-fledged internal audit for a client, and then in addition to that, purely from a commercial sense, if there is a proposal also to do a kind of a process audit, that's where one is to stop the line and not do it. But the way corporates are approaching and internal auditors are responding that, sometime within the overall internal audit mandate, there are some of the specific exercises, or maybe if you are basically you're mandated to have a 10 audit to be done in a particular time frame, a couple of them could be designed in terms of scoping engagement, which are dedicated and focused only towards the process audit. So as long as the process audit execution is remaining within the overall part of broader internal audit engagement, it remains perfectly fine. If you are not engaged with the client for internal audit activity, then as a value additive opportunity, if you can very much engage with those clients for doing, which is exclusively process audit, which can be over and above, maybe some other firm might be doing internal audit, and you can kind of engage with the client for a process audit, which is completely different and disengage with internal audit. So that's the way one need to kind of evaluate. But from a legality perspective, if there is no commercial conflict of interest, then there is no prohibition or restriction for the internal auditor not to do a process audit.
Okay. Thank you, sir. The next question is, can there be any standardized scope of work?
I would say that it can be as a reference. So if you look at any good internal audit standards locally in India, or maybe IIA and those kind of standards, it does provide some amount of an fairness of what is the recommendatory approach or some of the common minimum areas which need to be covered in a scope of work. So to that extent, standardization is pretty much easily available on tap. Practically, when you start doing, you can, it's advisable to use it. This is a beginning point as a reference. But when you engage with the client, there are lots of very, very client specific nuances which will keep kicking in. So instead of sticking to that, what is a globally universal kind of a standard scope, one need to use that as a reference and really, really customize to accommodate and include exactly the things which are relevant for a client, and then come out with the final scope. That's where I would use it. One should not make a mistake of go only by what is universal recommended standard, because then you are losing an opportunity of not having a sight on the things which are very specific nuances and important control areas prevailing at that point of time with the client. So that's what I would advise.
Okay, sir. And the last question is, could verbal discussion during IA will constitute as a audit evidence?
I would say no. If you are talking audit evidence from the point of provability at some point of time, particularly in case of an internally, there is a, as long as there is a trust, which is what I touched upon, these are considered to be valid discussion point. But as far as something which is more towards conflict and kind of an legality, then verbal discussion doesn't stand true. That's why I'm saying, keeping that softer piece aside, I recommend that all internal auditors, that, powerful to have those verbal discussion, confirmations, everything which is coming out of that. But more towards conclusion, I think it is recommended that if any of a verbal discussion and basis which you are kind of putting and framing up your conclusion, there need to be kind of supported through. And one of the good practice which I have seen working is by way of negative confirmation. So I think if you are not getting a positive confirmation coming from other side, you at least take that one extra onus and kind of form it up, that verbal piece and more of a conclusion of that towards more of a negative confirmation going from your side, giving an opportunity of kind of businesses to kind of either accept, not accept, and get into another kind of conclusion which is coming out of that. So that's where I would recommend.
Thank you so much, sir, for session. Also, we have a QA session at the 8:30. Anyone members, want
sure.
to ask anything, he can ask it from you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure and my pleasure, and will be happy to associate it. My coordinates are pretty much available. So anyone wanted to even connect for any further discussion, any exchange, we'll be happy to do that. So thanks a lot once again. My pleasure and best wishes.
Thank you so much, sir. Also, our branch chairman, C. Nikhil Narang, has joined. Actually, at that time, he was facing some technical issue. So hope now it is resolved. Now I like to welcome C. Nilanjanan Sen for our next session on the topic of digital era of internal audit, remote audit. Coming over to ma'am B profile, she is FCA and qualified DISA. Okay, and she has also done certificate course on forensic audit, concurrent audit of the bank, and index of ICA. She is currently partners with SB Associates since 2005. Ma'am, are you saying something? Okay. She is empaneled as GST faculty of ICMAI. Also, she is empaneled with the ICA as a peer reviewer, conducting professional workshop for income tax officer and GST officer. She is having more than 20 years of experience in the different fields that's covered majorly as assurance audit, risk and control analysis, taxation fields including indirect and direct, due diligence, financial re-engineering, and information system audit, forensic and fraud audits. Also in the field of forex and treasury management, also providing consulting in the field of project financing, and also act as an advisory on the corporate social responsibility. So I would like to invite CA Nilanjan Sen for second round of session. Over to you, ma'am. Ma'am, you are on mute. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Please continue.
Okay, I'll just, 1 sec, I'll start the screen sharing.
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you. First of all, I would like to give my heartfelt gratitude to the Institute for giving me an opportunity to speak on this topic. And a warm welcome to all my peer members out there. Thank you so much. Today's topic is remote audit in the digital era of internal audit. So shortly, I will first just quickly go through the background of remote audit, what has triggered the onset of the remote auditing concept. So this has basically come or triggered because of the coronavirus, which has set around 2020, around 2 years back, and when we were forced mostly out of the small cubicles and the conference rooms in our offices, and complete mayhem ruled, and we were forced to start working from the homes. So pandemic basically acted as a catalyst to the adoption of the remote auditing. Now, remote audit and agility audit is an alternate way of conducting the internal audit process. So basically, agile auditing is nothing but the way in which the audit is conducted in a more speed manner, in an efficient and more effective manner. Now, embracing digital transformation. Now, in remote audit, the most basic factor is that the auditors or the companies, I should not say the auditors, the companies moved in to adopt the ICT or the information and communication technology as a way of doing their work, of running the organization, and internal audit was very much part of it. Now, internal audit team can be free-spirited, who can engage, reach out and do things by themselves. Now, previously, as internal auditors, we were focused on doing the work, on going on field to the client office, asking questions, observing them, performing the procedures, and taking down notes, and so on and so forth. But now, with the paradigm shift in remote auditing, what happened is that the internal auditors now had to acquire a new set of soft skills, which previously they might not have acquired. So that, and what happened is that since they have to be based remotely, not in one place, so they had to be more independent in their thinking and taking a logical decision also. Now, what are the best practices of remote audit? Create criteria for assurance. Now, what is assurance? We were already having this internal auditors. One of our main duties was to provide assurance to the organization that its internal controls were functioning. So now, meanwhile, in this assurance under remote auditing, basically what happened is that because of the use of technology by the organization, we now had to do an in-depth process control risk analysis, in which the management expected us to perform better, to give them an assurance that now the change controls are working effectively. Now, clear, proactive, and transparent communication. Now, as internal auditors, we were always expected to communicate with the clients, with the auditees. But now over here in remote audit, what happened was that we are not having the auditees in front of us. The physical self is missing. So now we are left at the mercy of the technology. What technology? We have the technological enablers for meetings using, say, Skype, say, using, say, webinars. Google Meets, and data could be shared over other enablers of technology like share screen. So what was required is that what we require for commencing the audit and for doing the audit and the actual documents which are produced to us becomes very important unless and until it is communicated very, very concisely what we want. Now, risk-based and site-based audit plan. Now, previously it was site-based because the audit teams were just going on to the client's premises and they were doing the audit on the traditional way which we are used to. And now under risk-based, what happens was that we are unable to see the person in front of us. We are unable to see what are the process being followed over there. We are left at the mercy of the documents which we asked for. So basically, how do we do the risk assessment? We are asking for a set of documents. We run some analytical procedures. We get some trends out of it, and we do a risk-based analysis out of there. Now, GRC and workflow applications. Now, GRC and workflow applications is the management at the top will always now expect from the internal auditors a much more assurance that the controls in place, which were previously not there when technology was not in place as so much in the organization, is now working. So in comes in the question whether the data over there is getting protected, and strengthen first and second line workforce. That is, the audit teams. The audit teams have now to gear up and possess some soft skills in which they can do the audit procedures remotely at their place. Previously, when they were working as a part of the audit team, suppose a junior, let's say a junior article and a semi-qualified and a qualified forms part of the team. And now since they are not at one place and they are dispersed in different locations, what they have to do is they have to gear up. They have to gear up the soft skills so that the documents, when they come in, they can do actually the analytics on them. They can analyze the data and they can actually share the issues with others so that remote auditing or we can actually put forward those issues to the auditing as a control shortcomings. Now, what are the components of remote audit? Now, increase in formal and informal touch points to maintain communication. Now, formal communication should consider scheduling additional meeting online for engagement, planning meeting, midweek team status touch point, end of the week wrap up, issue discussions, and review of audit draft report. Now, previously what happened is that on the commencement of an audit, we have an engagement planning meeting with our audit staff. We can follow them up on the audit program, whether the audit is actually progressing as per the scheduled timeline, whether there are any hindrances in it, whether the issues that need to be escalated to the management are getting escalated, and then wrap up by giving a draft report and a final report. Now, in the remote audit scenario, when we are mostly dependent on virtual meetings, this becomes a very tricky issue since we are now using technology for actually discussing things. Suppose, for example, we want a document from a client and it comes in a PDF version to us. The most, in most cases, what I have seen is that the information which is being asked for and the information which the client provides does not match. So we need to be very clear about the information which we need from the auditee before starting the audit. So auditee communication will include a kickoff meeting, remote interview, weekly updates, and closing meetings. Now, order of procedures and deliverables should be considered. Now, since it is a remote audit, the management now what is expects from us that it's going to be completed in a very fast-paced audit. Not like suppose if we are just going to an physically going to an auditee, taking documents from them, going through them, interacting with them. Since now the data is being transmitted to us digitally, what they expect from us is that a much faster deliverables within a very short time. They want to know that the controls which were previously not there, which we have been now embedded as a result of the technology, increased technology, whether those controls are working there, and they are more concerned about the control areas around the key indicators, around the key areas of key indicators. They want more insight on that. Now, what is remote audit? Now, remote audit, which is also known as a virtual audit, is a method of conducting an audit remotely using electronic methods to obtain audit evidence. The overall aim is to evaluate this evidence objectively to determine the extent to which audit criteria has been fulfilled. And during this type of audit, auditors are able to adopt the standard auditing techniques which they use during on-site audits, but only using technology as an enabler. So we shall quickly go through the remote audit versus traditional audit. So traditional audit, the onboard starts from the company itself. Pre-audit remote analysis is very limited. During the audit, we focus on the documents, review of it, on-site observations, and other evidence gathering, and then we finalize the report. Remote auditing. Remote auditing starts with actual asking for document submission of documents from the clients. In most of the cases, what happens is that if it is an old client, an old auditee, in which the risk areas are already known to us, it becomes easier for us to ask for the documents to be audited, in the areas to be audited. But suppose it is an old client and a new process which has come in, and we are unable to go physically to the auditee's organization, it becomes more difficult for us to do a risk assessment at that point based on only the documents being asked for. So what is required in the pre-audit remote analysis is that an extensive review of documents, an extensive review of SOP if it is over there, and then we can ask for the set of additional documents as required as the audit progresses. So built on pre-audit analysis and communication between the auditor and the company, and within the block of time allowing the auditors have always more room to analyze evidence, because previously during the traditional audit, the time spent by us, in going and traveling, that time is totally available to us in analyzing more evidence if required. Now, think agilely. So we in remote audit, what do? We have inculcated the concept of agility, in which the audit quality is increased, the audit cycle is shortened, there is more interaction with the auditee in providing insights, but remotely. So over here, individuals and interactions over process and tools becomes more important, because human resource are the major resource available to us, who can actually look the process changes and who will be able to give us more insight into it. And sorry, just one sec. So human resource becomes more important, in which there is a process change and in which they can give us more insight into it. And working software is more important than comprehensive documentation. Now, since we have a standardized set of audit worksheets also, which is more or less built on documentation, which is already we know, we have less time to be spent on comprehensive documentation, and we can actually give more time in analyzing the data. And there is a customer collaboration over negotiation, because this means that while a particular process is being developed, since the customer or the auditee is involved in that process for process development, so the nuances which can, or the shortcomings which we can face after once it comes over, is reduced to a certain extent. So now, how can we do a remote audit? We can do a partial remote audit or a full remote audit. Now, what is a full remote audit? A full remote audit is where the remote audit is conducted entirely in remote, taking the help of technology. But in a partial remote audit, some of the audit work is done in a hybrid manner. Like the documentation part or the procedural part checking is done remotely, and some of it is done on site. For example, physical verification of inventory. Now, although we can do a physical verification of inventory by taking, the help of technology, say suppose using drones or using some surveillance cameras, it might not always give us the audit evidence which we are looking for. So in such cases, what happens, we can go in for a partial remote audit, that is a hybrid sort of audit. So what are the benefits of remote audit? It saves time and money by using technology. So a lot of overhead is saved. Suppose some rent overhead is there, in which previously the audit teams were there. We are saving on that. We are working remotely. We are saving on that. And the organization also, if they are still, some of the organizations may still follow a hybrid work culture. In some of the employees, they have an option of continuing to work from home, and or they can, or if the organization has started a culture of 3 days, physical office and 3 days work from home, a lot of cost on the overhead is saved. Now, avoiding traveling to difficult audit locations, a lot of logistics issues which might previously have been there when the audit teams were visiting geographically dispersed location, that can be reduced to a certain extent. Expanding audit coverage. Now, the time which we were previously spending in traveling to remote locations, to the auditees' place, are now saved, and that time can now be utilized in a much more fruitful manner, in which we can analyze the data, we can ask for more information, in which we can get some trends which previously during a physical audit would not have been visible to us. Now, the audit team will be more efficient because their capacity gets increased. They get to learn new technologies, expand use of specialists, because we have now in hand and a remote pool of specialists, let us say that, who will be available, which previously they might not be if we had to tell them to go to another location. We could not have used the expertise, but since they now do not have to travel, we can use those expertise. A more flexible approach improves document reviews. Improved use of available technology strengthens documentation and reporting, and logistics relating to auditing are not needed anymore. Now, what are the considerations of internal auditors when conducting a remote audit? Now, define the scope, purpose, timing, requirement, and method of each audit. Consider the accuracy, completeness, relevance, and reliability of evidence. This was previously there in a traditional approach of auditing also. Beware of potential for cyber attacks. Now, herein comes the question of cyber security. So, we now need to know what are the controls inbuilt over there, what are the measures which the management has taken for preventing the audit crimes, for the safety of our data, what are the security measures have been taken, and so on. Embrace flexible schedules. Now, embrace flexible schedules. Previously, what happened is that we had strictly to stick to a say 10 to 6 schedule or like that when we go physically to audit a client. But now over here with flexible schedules, since the audit team knows what is expected of them, they can review those documents at their own time, but sticking to the timeline of deliverables. And arrange audits so that audit activities are less disruptive to workflow. Now, what happens is that over here, when we physically go to a client, they have to give us a lot of time, since we will be asking questions, we will be asking them to submit documents to us, we will be asking them to resolve issues which have cropped up during the audit period. So all this actually disrupts their workflow. So in the remote auditing, since basically we are depending upon documents, what they can do is that they can get the documents ready at their own time and they can just share it with us. How the documents are getting shared it with us, technology will become an enabler. They can share those documents with us by using a share screen, or more nowadays, we can actually, audit will be more effective if we can ask the auditors for us to allow a direct access to their systems. Now, the risks in remote audit. So one is cybersecurity. What measures the organization has taken for protecting their data? Hey, organizational governance. What is the tone of the management at the top? What do they expect out of the objectives? How the business objectives are getting met? Data governance, how the data is getting secured, how the data is getting stored, how they are thinking of disposition of the data. Talent management, which becomes very important because what the skills they possess, whether they are in tune with the organizational needs. Their continuous upscaling of those resources is very important. And once those resources get upscaled, retaining those resources so that the organizational objectives are getting met. And business continuity and crisis management. Suppose in the era of remote auditing, in the controls being now set up, whether the business continuity plans of the organizations are attuned to such crisis, whether they will be able to take care of that. Now, what are the factors which affect fraud in such a audit? This is pressure, opportunity, rationalization, capability, and arrogance. So we shall quickly go to that. Now, pressure. For example, to show what is pressure, since we are not physically present over there, there might be a pressure from the management to the employees to show us, to give us data which is actually not what it is. So basically what we get window dressed documents. Opportunity. Now, frauds caused by limited supervision and control system. So one example might be no laid down SOP defining segregation of duties. Previously, which we could have observed while a physical inspection. Now, we do not know whether, in spite of having an SOP, we do not know whether that same person is actually doing the same duty or not. So in such a scenario, we might not be able to, come across or another fraud which might be lurking behind. Now, rationalization. Existence of attitude, characteristics, or a set of ethical values that allows certain parties to commit fraudulent act. For example, we have receiving money, receivables, we have received the money against account receivable, and it is not getting accounted for. And we previously, which could have unearthed that, because we are not physically present over there, we cannot unearth that. Capability. Abilities possessed by someone in the company will affect the possibility of someone committing a fraud. Now, for example, a change of directors in a company. So by the time the previous management has left and the new set of directors step in, there is a period where the new directors have yet to acclimatize themselves, and a fraud in that intervening period might happen. And arrogance, managerial owner, where the manager is also a shareholder and under the attitude that no internal control will apply to them because they are in that status and position. So, as processes are changed and adapted to accommodate remote working or other operational changes, internal audit should review the key processes for fraud risk and identify any unmitigated gaps. So now, what are the technologies involved? Now, video footage photos, it gives the auditors a snapshot in time view of the audit site. Permanently installed cameras, continuous surveillance of operations. Drones, it can either provide remotely sensed imagery or track GPS to record location data. Imagery can provide views over time, and it can also be used as a point-in-time exercise if so instructed by the audit. And for meetings, Zoom, Skype, video conferencing technologies may be adopted. Now, scheduled meetings, it becomes very important because I can share one incident which happened in which we were the auditors, we were present in the client branch office of a client, and we were supposed to finalize a report with the management who was sitting and who was based in the HO. So what happened is that we were discussing among ourselves before the scheduled meeting was supposed to start. Although we could see that the over the camera that the people in the HO were also sitting waiting for the scheduled meeting to happen, and all of a sudden we were discussing among ourselves, and all of a sudden what happened was that the counterparty from the HO actually started interacting with us, and we were dumbfounded because we were under the impression that the scheduled meeting was yet to begin, so that the mics had been turned off. So what had, this is being shared on a very lighter note, but it could have a really very dire consequences. If so, scheduled meetings is very important. Now, so what are the limitations using technology in remote audit? It can get hampered due to poor internet connection, in a lack of access to internet, and if the choice of correct technology is not being made. Now, what are the challenges in remote audit? The inability to access locations may necessitate to reprioritize the audit plan to focus on audits that can be performed remotely. So to mitigate that, what do we have to do? We have to engage early with the management and the audit committee to make such changes and to prioritize the availability of evidence. Timeliness of receiving information is harder to enforce when we operate remotely. So we have how to mitigate such. Keep on top of all document the request with clear deadlines for receipt. So this is very important that we receive the documents in a predefined set of time. Risk associated with delays in receiving information, where there could be a lack of credibility of audit information received remotely, and accelerate the deployment of analytics to increase the coverage and reduce business interruption while providing valuable insight and assurance. Lack of face-to-face interactions make it harder to build connections with the management. Now, identify key managements during the planning and schedule calls in advance progress updates and close-out discussions. Training team members is more difficult remotely and may take more time. So pre-fieldwork training through video allows for more effective feedback. The internal auditor should hold calls with each team member in advance to fieldwork to walk through their scope area and work program and support preparation of test sheets. In general, the audit team is more efficient and focused when co-located, and harder for team members to share knowledge and stay aware of progress remotely. So what is required is that we set up a regular team catch-up calls in advance of and during fieldwork, see what are the issues which they are facing and escalate it and to meet the deadline. Reports and work papers may take longer to get reviewed than they would in a normal business environment. So a video meeting should be scheduled among the internal auditors to review reports and work papers in real time. Audit work may seem less structured when performed remotely in compared to the work conduct in a normal business environment. So what do we have to do is that we recognize open communication and clearly define deliverables, proactively discuss the tools and technologies, be open to more efficient technologies to improve the audit. For global organizations, time differences may make it difficult to schedule calls with management and other team members. And when allocating resources, what do we have to do? We have to factor in the time zones and location of the people working on the same or overlapping scope areas, determining the feasibility of co-sourcing resources as appropriate. And when team members are in different locations, sometimes language barriers make it difficult to translate documents in real time. So what do we have to do? We have to do a balancing of the language skill across team members at the planning stage itself. So this is an example of a virtual audit flow. What is required is a general audit plan. We do a pre-request of a document. We do the actual pre-audit site review online, taking the help of technology. Site level audit plan is developed. We put in some questionnaires. We do a virtual site visit. We conduct interviews. We do the review, documentation review, and then an audit report is prepared. So remote audit, this is a new normal which we have to acclimatize ourselves with, in which more hybrid working environments may be adopted by the organizations. The internal audit function has to develop more on the soft skills. The internal auditors have to have a strong grasp of the basic of data analytics. The internal auditor has to ask the clients to update the risk assessment, and the internal auditors have to pivot the audit plan accordingly. We have to reassess the risk related to security and the information systems. And we have to design a digitally enabled audit operative model and the auditor's ability to adapt to a different way of interacting with technology and information. So that is all. Thank you from my side.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a wonderful session. Let me see. Guys, if you have any query, please drop in the comment box. Okay. So, ma'am, we have one query. With AI taking over the maker checker task and also control checks, does the future of IA have any scope of professional to conduct any internal audit?
Can you repeat the question once more?
Yeah, ma'am. Ma'am, let me type in the chat box also.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, ma'am, I have message.
Yeah, taking over the picture and also control check does the future of internal audit having scope of a professional to conduct an internal audit? Sure. If the internal auditors are not there, even if IA takes over, okay, how do we know whether there are any gaps over there? Because when an IA is being built, it is basically dependent upon the people in the organization who gives in the inputs. And unless there is a third party to review that, I don't think that any gaps will come out of that.
Okay, thanks, ma'am. The second question is whether remote audit can be applied to branches where we cannot reach due to the rain or place like hill stations, kind of things.
Sure, that is what remote audit is for. Only we have to have a technology in place, and where we have to auditee also how they can apply the technology. How in such a case, how they can send the documents to us, how we can get the access to such documents if further information is required. So as I've already told that in such cases, it would be good if the auditee allows access to their systems in which they give an access to the auditor. And if it is not possible, then we take the help of cloud technology. If it is there, they can put the scan and put the documents over there, in which we can retrieve the documents from there, and which we can do our audit also.
Okay. Ma'am, next question is, could remote audit be applicable for ESG audit?
No, it is outside the scope of remote audit.
Okay. Any other question, member? If you have, please put in the chat box. Or also, we are having a QA session after 8:30. If any queries left. Okay. Now we have. Yes, there was one more. Okay. Do you think analytical tool like CAT have become compulsory? Can you give other tips for sampling analytics?
See, I would now a lot of analytical CAT tools are there to help us, but now in the last 2 years, there are other analytical tools available also in the market, and we can take the help of such sampling tools also to do data analytics.
Okay, thanks, ma'am. The next question is on this form itself. We came to learn that as per the World Economic Forum, the scope of accounting and audit are going to be minimal by 2024. Please comment.
See, regarding this answer, it's going to be purely my personal views. See, even the scope of accounting and auditing are going to be minimal. The role of auditing cannot be, ruled out completely, because the management at the top will always want an assurance whether the objectives of the business are being met in the way they want to. So unless and until they have a third party assessment, how can they know that? So I think that the scope of the auditors will be there. Maybe not, the terminology will not be auditors anymore, but a scope will definitely be there.
Okay, thanks, ma'am. The next question we are having, we are doing tenure audit and physical audit for some checking of prices functioning according to SOP. Now management expectation become very high and good on adding additional scope quarter after quarter with no increase in remuneration. How to handle this?
See, this is actually a very tricky question because if we want to keep the client, we have a certain extent given to his demands. But at the same time, we can just put a request, in all these cases, we just have to put in a request to the management. And maybe what happens is that since we give them let's say we give them a costing of our human resources which will involve in it, and how they have upgraded their skills and qualifications, which will give them the better result. In that way, if we put forward it to them, maybe they can take a stance on it of increasing the remuneration, not based on the workload, but since we are giving a better quality of people out there to work.
Okay, thanks, ma'am. Ma'am, the next is requesting remote audit previous slide, please journal workflow.
Yeah, it has already been shared. So should I go back to it, or is it going to be shared?
I think, no, it's not. I'm not sure for sharing the things, but if you can go back and.
Sure. Yeah, can you see it?
No, ma'am, I'm not able to see.
Okay, just one second.
Last, but
is it okay now?
Ma'am, it is last but before slide, please.
This one?
It mentioned like last but before slide, please.
See, this is the last and this is last before. So
visible, ma'am. Slide is not.
Okay, just one second. Yeah, just one sec. It is visible to me. Okay. Here. Is it okay now?
Yes, ma'am. It's yes. It was a journal workflow, ma'am. I think.
I think this is the only workflow which I have given. Any other? Acha? Did you want this? See, the last before slide is this example of a virtual audit flow.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
See, if there is any questions regarding this, I can take it after the QA session. If you can put in his questions there.
Right, ma'am. Sure. Okay, ma'am. Other question we can take on the QA sessions after 8:30, ma'am. Perfect. Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you. Yeah. Now we have our third session with our next faculty. It would be the risk-based audit, a way forward, with Kamaljeet Kaur Soni, ma'am. She is an FCA, also certified fraud examiner from USC. She is a certified international investigator, committee member of PhD Chamber of Commerce, also deputy chairman of IAIA India, member of Center of Audit Quality ICA. She is a cyber fraud investigator for more than 18 years. Also, she is a consultant and trainer and having a vast experience over different fields related to audit and its related fields. So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So once again, it's pleasure to get connected, and it's pleasure to take session for ICI as always. The agenda for me being here is just to give my insight how we see the profession of internal audit changing. I may not be doing a lot of PPT kind of discussion, but that's something where I would like to have my insight, how I have seen or observed, profession of internal audit evolving and changing. So the landscape of audit has really changed in last many, many years. However, last 2 years been quite disruptive, right? So I'm just gonna share screen for you guys to know more about risk-based audit. But as I understand, this is something which most of you would be aware of. What is risk-based audit? Since I was listening to the last speaker, and then she was mentioning quite a lot about frauds happening in the companies, etc. The role of internal auditors have really evolved in last many years. There used to be time when there used to be clear-cut, brackets that auditors just a watchdog, not a bloodhound. But all of us have realized that no longer now. Whether you are internal auditor or you're external auditor, your role has really evolved and changed. Still, the primary responsibility of risk management still lies with management. It is not a primary responsibility of auditors to manage the risk. However, the assurance part is something where we have some add-on responsibilities. Now, when we talk about risk-based audit no longer is something where we only focus on specific process-based risk or business risks. When this particular concept started, initially, a lot of people had a myth that, you go do internal audit. In process, if you come across any risk, cover that, do assurance, do reporting about it. But then eventually, auditors understood it better. Risk-based audit is not something where during the process of internal audit, we come across any risk and we cover that. Rather, risk-based audit is something where we should assess the risk before we begin. The primary responsibility of risk Management lies with the management. However, the auditor need to be really, really clear and sure where a person is entering as an auditor. We normally talk about three words, GRC, governance, risk, and control. And all three goes absolute hand in hand. A basic thumb rule. Good governance comes with better controls. And the company will have risk which is manageable. A risk where auditors can rely on the control of the company. And then comes the bad governance. Everything goes haywire. A bad governance. Sure. Frankly, I'm not even actually doing anything from slide, but yes, I can do that. Better? Thank you. Yeah, so I was talking about governance, GRC, governance, risk, and control. A company where we have good governance, everything is fall in place. And we, as an auditor, before starting our work, we can rely on the control far more than otherwise. The company with having loose governance or governance which is already under question mark is something where auditors have to really walk slow. We know that we can't trust their controls much. So here our risk assessment before we begin our work should be very, very different. So when we talk about risk-based audit, it doesn't go in isolation. In fact, in any company, whether it is a small size business, mid-size or top, we can never separate these three words GRC. There are absolute examples available in India or outside. We've been listening about the controls and closely linked to the governance part. There are many, many big examples where top managements have gone into different form of frauds. With loose governance, everything flows accordingly. So when we talk about risk-based audit, my take on this is that the risk-based audit remains same. What auditors have to find out the risk in the beginning, and then when they decide the nature, scope, and timing of audit, they should absolutely keep this thing in mind, that how much is the risk. What has changed in last few years, especially last 2.5 of pandemic year, the risks have changed. The methodology to deal with that has changed. The concept of risk-based remains same. What will change? Correct? So what we have seen in last 2.5 years, there are various kind of risk which we as auditors could not foresee, or probably we never thought that we're going to be dealing with. We are dealing with it. And if anything to go by predictions, this is just one of the pandemic, right? Probably these kind of disruption, if not exactly same, some or other may come. If you see the global trends of internal audit, it's quite changing. Automation, yes. Internal audit has become automated or robotic in many, many countries. So most of the developed countries are having more of a robotic process now when it comes to internal audit. However, I still think there is something where human intelligence still comes into picture, and that is what is called risk-based audit. Computer can assist, but human intelligence is still supreme. The way we look at the risk, the way we foresee the risk, the way we perceive a particular risk in a particular scenario is something where we can take assistance from technology, but we should always rely on our judgments. So last 2.5 years, certain newer risks have come into the market. One of them is asset-based risk. We as an auditor always feel asset is something which is something a company has to safeguard. We always centralize our audit procedure towards assets of the company, but this asset risk has really gone up because now people are working remotely. Most of us have worked home-based, and that is where companies have seen this risk really going up. The second kind of risk, which has really shot, is cybersecurity, information security. The moment you connect your laptop to your home Wi-Fi, you get exposed. A lot of people, in last many years, because they used to feel bored at home, they used to go to any coffee shop or whatever is open that time. They used to sit there, connect. Then people used to travel, used to stay in hotels. They used to connect to Wi-Fi. Each time you get connected to the local Wi-Fi, you get exposed. Here I mean company's data. So information security is one of the very, very big threat which has emerged in last few years. Even before pandemic, information security was absolute a challenge, and now it has gone really up. So now when we talk about changing dynamics of audit, when we talk about risk-based audit, one of the very big risks which we have to take care of is cybersecurity or information security. How far companies taking steps to protect themselves? Because everything is data today. You talk about operations, you talk about operational efficiency, you talk about anything. Everything is linked to data. And if data cannot be protected, how company will get protected? So information security has emerged as one of the very, very big risks, which we as internal auditors have to deal with. The second risk, as I mentioned, asset-based risk. Because again, employees are working from home, assets get exposed. So you are carrying the official laptop, official phone, and many other assets depending on the nature of work. And that is where we see the risk. Since risks have changed, so should be the way we deal with it. Internal audit has become automotive in last many years, and it's gonna be more and more robotic, as I said. However, the use of technology and data analytics is something which is absolutely need of an hour. When we talk about using data analytics, most of us link it to having automated process. But data analytics does not only mean automation. Data analytics also mean what kind of data or historic data you are pulling and how do you create the future models. Anybody who would be aware of the concept of predictive learning would be aware of this concept. How do you think your e-tailing company knows that what you are planning to buy? They have a historical data of your purchase. They see the pattern, right? What kind of purchases do you make? Do you do some kind of specific shopping for your kids or home-based thing? Or what is basically the nature, the trend? And accordingly, they give you suggestions. So I'm sure most of us would have purchased something on Amazon, Flipkart, and then we would have received their mails or notification that why don't you consider buying this? How do they get to know that this is something which you can think of? So every business is these days in some or other ways actually using this. How does it really work? To put it in very simple term. You take some historical data, use mathematical models on it, and with this trend of historical data, we see how much is the probability that these things can get repeated in the future. Or you take the historical data, let's say in terms of any kind of sites where you see more frauds happening. Take that historical data of that site. The more historical data, better for data analytics. Then use your algorithm or models on it with data analytics and see how much is a probability that similar pattern will be repeated. So each time we talk about risk-based audit, the internal auditor should take help of this. many cases manually it's next to impossible, right? So for example, you are doing audit of let's say Maruti service center, where there's so many spare parts, you just can't check everything, right? So we always use sampling, testing. With data analytics, things are far easier for us. Pick up riskier area, see how far is the probability that these risks can be repeated in future, or it can come. Correct. So that is where data analytics comes into picture, where we see the historical trend and see whether these kind of thing can be repeated in future, or if not, then do we see different kind of risk? The pattern is changing or pattern remain constant. The another thing which is being used in internal audit quite a lot these days is AI, artificial intelligence. Do we use artificial intelligence? Just a quick message on chat box would suffice. Are you guys using AI day in, day out? Yes, no? So guys, artificial intelligence is something which all of us are using almost on daily basis. The moment you use your Google, you are actually dealing with AI. Not to go very far, and all of us do use. Another example could be your smartwatches. If you are using iOS, then your Siri. All these are example of artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence is a step ahead, correct? Artificial intelligence definitely work for data analytics, but as I said, it is basically trying to be a next human, right? It learns from us. So let's say if you create a pattern, it will not only create a pattern for you, it will also tell you that this kind of thing should not happen, or these two things should not be linked. Or in some cases, that these things today are not connected, but have a probability to get connected. That is where we as an auditor can take help of AI. Now, probably a question would come to your mind that how am I going to use AI for my audits? The risks have changed. So is the expectation from internal auditor. Gone are the days when expectation from auditor was to simply give assurance and maybe giving some consulting. When we talk about consulting, especially in the case of risk-based area, in some cases, the expectation of management has really gone up, where they want auditors to support them in looking at future risks as well, not the current risk and the way it's being dealt. Now, when you are talking about anticipation of risk, don't you think it's absolutely a step ahead? A risk which has not even arise as yet. An expectation from you that you should anticipate that risk and take a measurement to protect it today. You'll be amazed that there are companies. Of course, when the corona came, nobody was really aware that this can come. However, there were certain companies globally who were actually prepared for it. Not exactly because they knew what kind of disruption might come, but they were prepared for such kind of risks, which we see post-pandemic. Now see how much would be the foresightness. And it is not just management who did it. Their auditors have equally supported them. And this could have been actually possible with technology, data analytics, artificial intelligence, and of course, a very important aspect called human intelligence. When all these things comes together, you basically not only deal with current risks, you also deal with the risk which may arise in future. Today, a company is not considered a very good company in terms of dealing with risk, who can deal the risk which is right at the doorstep. A good company is a company which can foresee the risk few years down the line. and take protective measure today, right? The question arises as to, again, why do we use data analytics? Data analytics help us getting the risk live. For example, how antivirus work. Earlier, the traditional antiviruses, they used to scan the computer. They used to, oh, yesterday there was a virus attack. Now let me find it and destroy it. Do you think it's same today? Isn't it? Our antiviruses are absolutely strong and live. They find the virus live and take action on it. So exactly same ways, we need to find the risk live and deal with it. You can't do a post-mortem activity where, okay, fine, the risk has arisen, 6 months back, now let's do something about it. Well, no longer now. If you see this picture, it's basically talks about the role of internal auditor. It also says what are the core role of internal audit, and then what are the activity which we should not do. So goes without saying that on your right side, extreme right, is something which internal auditors should not do. We should not ever get involved in setting the control or doing risk management for them. Our task is still the same, do the consulting. And consulting does not mean doing it yourself. It's absolute different thing. You ask management will be more than happy. And they say, Mr. Auditor, why don't you do it for us? You're too good with this. However, we know that we cannot do it and we should not do it. Now, if you look at your extreme left side, we talk about core internal audit roles, which says that we should give assurance, and then we should give assurance on risk management process. Next time, when you talk about risk-based audit or you do your respective risk-based audit, not only look at how management is dealing with their current risk, also see their foresightness towards the future risk. Whatever is the industry you guys are dealing with, whatever is the size of the company it is, every business has a future risk. And if a company cannot deal with that future risk or is not prepared to deal with that risk, the future of that company doesn't seem bright to me. Correct? Sustainability reporting is something where all of us are talking these days. Now, if I link sustainability to risk, a company which is not able to see the risk down the line, do you really think company is going to be having a sustainable future? Company may not be able to either survive, or if they'll be able to survive, they may not be able to thrive. Correct? So here we have to give assurance how management is dealing with the risk. And then we should also see whether the management has a capability enough to evaluate the risk correctly. Sometimes company thinks this risk cannot happen. I'm sure 4 steps of risk management, we all would be aware. Step number 1, risk identification. Step number 2, risk mapping, where you prioritize the probability and outcome, which is also known as red, amber, green report or heat map in corporates. Step number 3, that we go for risk mitigation via TARA, transfer, avoid, reduce, accept. And 4th step is monitoring. These are 4 primary steps which normally company takes for managing the risk. Now, each time we talk about these steps, now add one more point in it, and that point will be current plus anticipated risk. So that is where we should see how correctly company is able to evaluate their risk. Are they even looking at that risk or not? Correct? So if you see the left side, bottom left, these are the functions which auditors should do. However, just be a bit more futuristic here. Then in mid is something which we understand it's more about consulting, where we support the company, we support with strong enterprise risk management. And of course, we should tell company, how to strengthen the controls, how to make a better risk management. As I said a few minutes back, the risk control and governance goes hand in hand. So today, the expectation from auditor is not just to talk about controls and risk. The expectation from auditor is also to look at governance part. In Stat Audit, we do see that report where external auditor talk about corporate governance, but that role is not just restricted to external auditors. Internal auditors need to look at governance even more than stat auditors. Reason being, you're gonna relying on their controls and risk management. So your entire nature, scope, and work of IA relies and goes back to governance part. So if we are into IA profession and we are not looking at governance strongly, that means we are not doing our work properly. So this is one of the things which I see in risk-based audit, that so about this particular brief interaction what we are having, my sole objective and a single message for all of you is that risk-based audit is same as what it used to. Nothing much has changed except how we deal with it. However, the thing which were absolutely and frequently changing are the risks. Unless and until we as an auditor are updated on that risk, how will we support the company in dealing with that risk? So most importantly, when we talk about changing dynamics of audit, that changing dynamic applies to us as well. We need to get ourselves equipped. If I myself is not aware what is cybersecurity, or if I myself is not aware the cyber vulnerability, how am I going to support the company? One, your assurance. Second, your consulting. Both part, how will you deal with it? Unless we are equipped enough to be. When I say getting ourselves upskilled on that, it doesn't mean that we need to be getting into absolute IT zone or maybe learning coding, etc. But at least we should understand the weaker area. If you or me maybe not be expert in IT, we can always take expert help. That option is always available to us. But if you do not look at the vulnerability where the information can be leaked out or compromised or hampered, how are we going to strengthen the company's cybersecurity? The cybersecurity is one of the biggest threat to the companies these days. So when we talk about risk management and we are not talking about information security or cybersecurity, then you're not covering the entire picture. A picture which is actually getting more into cybersecurity part. Second, when we talk about changing dynamics, we need to really get ourselves upskilled again on the tool and techniques to handle it. Data analytics has different variants. You should definitely get into a field where understand how to deal with it better. Technology is there to support us. So we should reduce our manual work. We should use technology in our favor, pull out as many reports as possible, look at as many trends as you want, and then do your audit. Things will be far easier for you, and you can concentrate on things which actually matters, right? So most of the time, we auditors get too busy in checklists. If you talk about a traditional internal audit model, we do have checklist, and then most of the time our teams get involved in following the checklist. Why not to do the same thing and do the checklist driven work? However, each time you take that particular segment, whether you're checking asset or any specific area, use the data analytics, use AI, look at the riskier area, concentrate on them first. You have covered the major risk area first. You're good. Correct? So testing and sampling always work. When you take out the sample next time, pick up the sample from riskier areas. See where you see more potential of problem or fraud. Fraud risk is one of the biggest risks we see in corporates these days. Risk is not just related to operations. A fraud risk is another risk which mostly companies neglect. For example, a company is $1 billion company. There are some frauds happening. The basic average ticket size of the fraud is not exceeding $100. A company would easily say, hey, we are $1 billion company. Why should we worry about $100 company? If we start investigating this fraud, our resources are much more expensive than getting the benefit of finding $100 fraud. So technically, they may be right. The cost here is more than reward. But do you think this is risk which is really worth taking? Nope. The moment companies say so, you give a message indirectly to the employee. As long as the fraud is $100 or less, company is okay with it. They're not going to investigate. Now multiply this. Multiply this with number of employee and frequency. And also remember, guys, one thing. Fraud is a fraud. Whether you take a pen from office, which I always give example in all my session, the next time when you pick up a pen from office or you take a printout from office for your personal stuff, remember this is a fraud. It's called asset misappropriation. Most of us do not like to say it a fraud. We have a lot of justification. I don't get time to go out and do it. Kal rakh dunga. All those kind of things. However, the difference between fraud and error is single, that is malicious intent. And it is not linked to the money which is involved. With this logic, any fraud which is small amount should not even be called fraud, right? So guys, materiality concept is important in audit. However, when it comes to fraud risk, the materiality is not linked to money. Even $1 fraud is a fraud. It should be stopped right here. If you don't stop it today, you may not be able to stop it tomorrow. So next time when you talk about risk-based audit or think about risk-based audit, please do consider fraud risk as well. It's an absolute bigger threat to the company. And most of the time, employee frauds are done for smaller amounts, not the bigger amounts. Because employees know that bigger amount will be caught very soon. They're smart enough to understand that. So fraud risk is another risk where I personally think internal auditors should focus more. It may not be our prime responsibility. We are not an investigator, and it may again be considered as a separate assignment. Still, while doing your risk-based audit, please do consider the probability of fraud risk as well. If you see even slightest sign of fraud, it should not be taken lightly. And once again, I would say, when it comes to fraud risk, fraud should not be linked to monetary terms. Just because amount is small, it does not mean it should be letting go. Right? So now, if you talk about changing dynamics, yes, internal audit has come a long way and has to go a long way. Automation, technology is definitely becoming part of our profession, and so is the changing dynamic risk. Now, my single take on this entire concept is that we need to be absolute dynamic as an internal auditor. The concept, what we have learned yesterday, may not be very relevant for today. So every day or every assignment of yours should come with new learnings about newer risk, newer ways to handle it, and keep yourself absolutely updated on it, because changing dynamic includes a lot of changes in the market, changes in the way frauds are happening, changes in the way risks are happening. That is why it's very important for us to get ourselves absolutely matching to the changing dynamics of the market. So that's my very brief take on it, and then I open it to questions. So I assume that you may have questions on it. So anything you want to ask, I'm absolutely available to answer.
Please put all the questions in the chat box. The question is, what is reasonable materiality?
Reasonable materiality. Frankly, materiality, the concept remains same. Anything which can impact the decision of user is material. It could be monetary, it could be non-monetary. Reasonable materiality is something where we see it has a potential enough to impact the decision of user. So in my example, if I go back to fraud example, even $100 fraud for $1 billion company, I would definitely consider as material because of the nature, not because of monetary value involved.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, ma'am. The next thing is more about asset risk. Any example, please?
Asset risk, take your example of your misuse of your laptops, moonlighting.
Yeah.
So there could be different kind of risk. For example, in home-based business or home-based work, what we were having in last 2 years, employees had a lot of company assets and then they were misutilized. So when we talk about risk, asset misappropriation include two type of risk, guys. Stealing of asset and misuse of asset, both.
Okay. The next is how to verify governance through technology.
So governance cannot be, judged through technology. I mean, you can definitely take some previous examples, etc., and see. However, I have, time to time added human intelligence. So governance is something where you have to definitely rely on human intelligence more than data, because that's something which reflects in their policies, their actions, and decisions. You can use technology to maybe see a trend in the kind of decisions they take, the kind of overrides they have taken. Probably here technology can support you, but ultimately decision making should be yours.
Thanks, ma'am. Statutory audit versus internal audit, which is more futuristic for our career?
Both, but I see internal audit is something which is going through more dynamic change, because why I'm saying this, because stat audit is more rule based, right? So of course, time to time we have new standards which needs to be followed, but to answer your question, I would say IA.
Okay, thanks. The question is how the risk in each step assessed in the virtual workflow audit.
Sorry, come again. I did not understand.
Yeah, how the risk in each step assessed in the virtual workflow auditing, I think.
So again, so frankly speaking, I'm not so clear about the question, but all I can say is that with technology, you can do the risk assessment at every step. So for example, a process which has 5 steps. Each steps pick up some particular type of risk. Use your technology and see what kind of risk do you think. And this is how it is. Go to the next step. So before you move to the next step, assess the previous step. Remember, guys, steps are connected. So when I was talking about risk processes, risk management process, it goes as a risk identification and then risk mapping. If I'm not able to identify my risk correctly, what will I map? What will I see probability and impact of? Because I don't even know how to assess the risk. So all these steps are interlinked. Okay. So let's say if you are doing a process risk audit and then you have not done risk assessment correctly to the previous step, your next step is not going to be correct either. That's what it is.
Thanks, ma'am. What about compliance risk, where it will affect an organization?
Compliance risk is one of the biggest threat. Company tomorrow government say, okay, shut down the operations. It's as simple as that. So compliance risk is gonna be always a supreme risk, and a company should definitely be very, very taking it seriously. So compliance risk is absolutely a very big risk. If I have to map it, the probability and outcome both are high.
Yeah. Thanks, ma'am. The next is explain audit materiality, risk threshold limit.
Audit materiality with what?
Risk threshold limit.
Risk threshold limit. Risk threshold is entirely depend on your risk appetite. If I'm doing audit of a bank and I have to check 200 account opening form daily as an auditor, I would check every single form daily, because here I cannot take any risk. So my risk tolerance is 0, right? My precision level has to be 100%. However, there may be some operation in the bank where I would say, okay, fine, 90% is fine. Some 80% would fine. So how much is the risk tolerance? Company has to decide how much risk they can take it.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Members, if you have any query still left unattended, please type in the comment box. Ma'am, we can wait for 1 or 2 minutes.
No problems.
Yeah.
No problems.
Yeah, ma'am. There is few more. How can we start working on our programming skill in this area of data science and AI? What would be the good starting point of an auditor, since algorithm might be too technical for an auditor to decode?
So as I said, I'm not saying that you guys get into IT and coding, because that's not our profession, and even if we get into it, we may not be doing great. So only do something which is actually required. Say start learning data analytics. There are so many online courses available. If time doesn't permit you to go out and study, take help of those courses. Understand how data connects. So my take on it, I'm also a chartered accountant like you guys, right? The way I basically look at things is see how data connects. That's what is important. I don't want you guys to go to backend and see how coding happens and system captures the data. That's maybe not even a core area. But you definitely understand the part how data can be pulled out, what kind of reports can be created out of it, and how you can understand that data. That's the area which you should concentrate on. There are many courses available for data analytics, etc. Rather than getting into programming, which is not our core area, you think more about analysis part, which has multiple variants. So machine learning, predictive analytics, and all these are part of your data analytics only.
Okay, ma'am. The next is how to measure audit materiality.
To measure audit materiality basis the risk. The risk and materiality goes hand in hand. So what kind of risk are we looking at? If I'm looking at fraud risk, my materiality concept remains different. So materiality, the definition, stick to the definition. Anything which impacts the decision of user is material. Now you apply this definition to whatever area you are in. Correct? It can be monetary, it can be non-monetary. So first thing you should keep something which out of your mind is materiality is not just linked to money. That higher value item are material. They are, but that's not the only definition, not the sole criteria.
Thanks, ma'am. Waiting for the other queries.
Sure.
The next is, ma'am, how one can decide what AI is to be used for any assignment.
No, so we don't use AI separately, right? So data analytical software guys have AI inbuilt. For example, today when you use Google, some of us would not even be aware that we are using AI. So there are a lot of smart data analytical tool like SES, etc., where AI is inbuilt. So normally when we go for a data analytical tool which is a high end, when I say high end, it's not mean pricing. High end means high with feature. AI could be a built-in part of it. So you don't need to choose AI. You need to choose the data analytics with the appropriate features. Okay.
Okay. The next question we have, risk-based audit is a time-taking compared with traditional internal audit, because audit is generally time-bound as expected by the top management.
Is it a question or a statement? So my answer, even if it's a question, then my take on then, so is the remuneration, no? So when you do risk-based audit, you get paid higher as well, right? Risk and reward goes hand in hand. Correct?
Yes, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Okay, guys. Now we have also with us Nilanjana Sen, ma'am. So any question with her or?
So before that, a quick thing, I may have to leave, I think, and if it requested. So I think if questions are done, thank you so much for having me, and namaskar, all the very best to you. Thanks, Kunjan. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Guys, any question with Nilanjana ma'am and I'm just waiting for any questions anyone have.
একটু বলতো ওখানে সেমিনার চলছে, ফোনটা ধরে বলে দিন, বারে বারে ফোন করছে। হ্যালো,
আন্টি
মায়ের একটা সেমিনার চলছে, ওটা হয়ে গেলে কল করছি।
Yeah. Okay. I think there is no question left with unanswered, so we can conclude this session. Thank you so much, Nilanjana Sen ma'am.
Thank you.
Shivani ma'am, Aarti ma'am, and Charanjit Singh Nanda sir, and our chairman of Rohtak branch, and all the support team Ayaz sir we are having with us for such an amazing webinar. We are get to know many things about different topics and how globally the internal audit is changing and what are the emerging fields we have. Thank you so much to all the members who have joined. One more thing I would like to add here. I have seen many messages that was like to request for the unstructured hour. Actually, as per the rules, you can also claim that unstructured CPR on the portal. You have to log in on the CP portal and mention your unstructured CPR there. In that, you can text in your CP portal reminder. And for the material, we will confirm if we can send on the mail, or you can directly contact with the faculties also. They can send you the same for the PPTs and other material. Thank you all once again. Have a great night. Bye-bye.